Good morning, kitties. How are you? I am recording now and I am on live. It is Tuesday and today is, what is today? August 25th. This August. It begins with an A. April 25th is April. Oh my gosh, we cannot pass up spring and summertime. We don't want to miss out on those wonderful seasons, right? Part of our 4 seasons. I look a little orange here. I'm going to change my lighting. Nobody wants to look orange. We know that. Maybe like that. Hold on. Let me change the other one. Let's watch the lighting change. Shall we? I think it's here. That's the one. Okay. And hopefully I won't kick that anymore. And hopefully that light won't go off. And we got started pretty much on time, almost on time today. I did sit down here on time, and that was really good. You know why? Because I have so much to talk to you about today. I do. If you remember, we kind of squeezed in, or squoze. I don't think squoze is the right word. It would be squeezed. We'll talk about that sometime in our phonics. Coming up every Wednesday is when we do our phonics. Every Wednesday. But on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we always do our stories, right? Well, if you remember, we squeezed in a story after we finished our Tales of Virtue, right? And that was what? Look at these. Look at these books I have right here. Hold on. Not those books. Those books that I've been collecting. Cornerstones of Freedom. Those books I am reading on our Bookless classroom. And we have a lot to talk about in the Bookless classroom about those books as well. I'm doing a lot of reading. So if you like me to read to you, come to the Bookless classroom. No matter what age you are, it doesn't matter. Come to the Bookless classroom. And it doesn't matter what age you are to come here either. It doesn't matter. Lots of people did not learn what they were supposed to learn. And it is so disappointing. It is so disappointing how many people we had work against our educational system. You know why? Because they wanted their own system. That's the reason why. They wanted the money to spend on their own system, which left less and less money for people who went to regular school. So we're going to talk about some of those things, and we talk about those things in our different classrooms. So it doesn't matter what classroom you come to. It doesn't matter. If you have something to learn, then come to one of the classrooms whenever you can. I'm not editing them, and I'm not putting music in them either. And I'm not putting music in them because I don't want to have to edit them and edit the music out if it gets copyrighted. Even though it's kind of interesting and it gave me a break, our classes are shorter, so we don't need a break, right? Awesome, much better. They're shorter. And sometimes we even get out of here in 30 minutes because especially if you are young, 45 minutes, an hour can be too long. But anyway, I'm doing a lot of reading, so you saw all those books. And I prepared a lot of stuff for reading today, but of course, I left my glasses right over there. And we don't need a music break. I just need to go get my glasses. So hold on 1 second. I do have the PowerPoints already. Yay! Hey, Ron DeSantis, you know what that is? It's a Disney shirt. Hey kids, you know what that is? That's a Disney shirt. That's what that is. It is. Doesn't it look like something Minnie Mouse would wear? Yes, it does. I loved it. I picked it up at a secondhand store, not at the Disney store. No, you know why? You know why? I like stories that are real. I don't like stories that are fake. I don't like fake stories. I think real life is more interesting, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about and getting started with right now. Real life stories is what we're going to do. So I squeezed in, if you remember the story on, and of course I didn't bring the book over here, and I have to have that book. I think I left it upstairs. That's okay. What was it? Sneetches, right? Wasn't it Sneetches? I know. If I don't have it right in front of me, I'm like, Sneetchers. It's not Sneetchers, it's Sneetches, right? Yes, and that's what we talked about, but I'll get to those slides in just a minute. In fact, no, we're not going to pop those slides up. So I snuck that one story in. Before that, we had Tales of Virtue, which were stories for young people on the Bible, right? Okay, well, this is what I decided to do for you now. And that is, I was looking through the books, and remember what I saw? Remember I saw the character stories on animals, or animal stories, character virtue stories are over there. And then another one, which was also character stories, which is where we read the story. What was it? Ecclesi. I don't remember the Roman names because I didn't study that. You know what I studied when I was little, instead of studying the mythology and things? What I studied when I was little was I studied Bible stories. And I'm so happy that I did. And the reason why I'm so happy that I did is because I'm going to tell you, and this is true, every story that we have comes from these Bible stories. And I believe these Bible stories are true. And I believe that every other story came from these Bible stories. So when we read about, what was it? Ecclesi, it wasn't that. The book is right over there. Let me get the name right, okay? I want to get the name right. It's silly for me to have a book and not have the name right, which is right over there. So hold on one second. So there's these classic children's stories, right, in this book. And some of them are wonderful. I mean, they are wonderful. If you haven't ever read them or heard them, you really want to read these stories. Like, for example, the ant and the grasshopper here. So this story, and again, the pictures are just magnificent, right? Don't you love those colored pictures there that are in this book, which is classic children's stories here, okay? So, and they are, and I remember many of these stories, but I didn't remember them. And you might not know them because you didn't have school like we did, right? Some of you didn't, at least even if you're still in school, you at least didn't have a couple of years, and some of you didn't even start school like we did, right? We knew it was very good for kids to start school in preschool, and all of a sudden we wiped that out for kids, right? So you can see that the stories are, that the pictures are really good, and it makes you very interested in reading the story. But what I learned that these stories were very much like the Bible stories, and that the Bible stories are really actually the real first stories, and that all other stories come from Bible stories. All other stories. And if you read the Bible, or if you come here and you read like the children's Bible, if you're younger with me, or if you just listen to me read it, it will remind you of other stories that you've heard before. The difference in Bible stories is this, is that Bible stories are written so that you learn something, which means that everybody in the Bible stories, they're not perfect. Everybody, if you remember, it was the master, but we didn't hear anything about the master. I was going to look up that name of that story, wasn't I? Some of you probably remember. but I do not remember exactly how to pronounce it. Androcles and the lion. And maybe I'm not even pronouncing that right. I'm not sure. I didn't look up the pronunciation. And even now, they're mixing things up so that we don't even have all the information that we're supposed to have. And I'm going to talk more about that in the Bookless classroom. So if we don't have all the information we're supposed to have, and we don't even know where these stories came from, we're not even sure where these stories came from, well, maybe we should go back to the first stories, where they all came from, where all the stories came from. And we're going to find out really that some of our fantasies in our Disneyland that we have really do come true. And isn't that better than living in a fantasy where really it's a fantasy, it's a dream, they don't come true, we wake up? Isn't it much better to hear stories that are real? And these are stories we can believe. These are stories we can believe. And we want to know them. In today's story, we're going to talk about why we want to know these stories. Okay? All right. So let's get started. Now look at what I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with this book. And this book is so beautiful. This book it's bound with leather, and it's got a beautiful title on the binding, all in gold here. So, it's called gold foil, but it doesn't come off. It probably would come off if I scraped it a lot. I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to do that to my books, because these books sometimes have so much information, and on the internet, we're going to lose this information that we have in these books. And I don't want to do that. That's why I read to you and I show you so many books. And this book is written on, it's got the way that it has got this open page here. I don't know what they call that, but I know what makes it special, because it protects the very first page is what it does. And that's so heavy, thick right there. It's almost like a piece of leather there as well, but it's not leather. I don't know what it is. Maybe it is something like leather. I don't know. Maybe it is. And then you could see that this is called the Reader's Bible. This is the Reader's Bible. And in the Reader's Bible, you can read it as if it's a book. And so I picked out something from this and look, it's a real Bible. This is a real Bible. It's missing some numbers and some headings, but you can read it like a book. And that's nice. It's kind of nice for some people. It helps them understand this a little bit better. So, kiddies, this is a book for, or anybody who's here. It doesn't matter, right? So I'm going to read this book. It's got no pictures in it. I'm not going to read this book. I'm going to read this part of the book. All right. Before I start our stories here. All right. So let me start reading for you. And this is from the Gospel according to John. So John wrote this book. Gospel means good news. So if you want to read about good news, you read this, right? And this author here, all of these books are about, all of these books in here, all these stories in here, there's 4 books, 4 different, and we call them books. They're like 4 different stories in here. Plus there's a little bit more on the end. They give you an extra bit on the end as well. Okay, so there's 4 stories in here about Jesus's life. All right, and John was one of the authors of this. And John knew Jesus. He met Jesus and he knew Jesus. And then he wrote about Jesus. And this is the very first part of what he wrote in his book that he wrote about Jesus. Remember, there are 4 books in here. It's like as if they had little books like this, little books, and they put 4 of them together in this bigger book. Okay? So this is the 4th story of Jesus in this book that I'm reading. Okay? And I'm just going to read just this very first part of the first book, or of the 4th book in here, the 4th book by John. All right. His name is John that wrote this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. Yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, not of will, not of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me." For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. Now, those are really pretty words, and they're really confusing. And why am I reading this in an early bird classroom? Because these words can be so confusing. But they're not. They're not. And they are beautiful words. They are such beautiful words. And so I'm going to just start that. That's how I'm going to start. I'm not going to explain those beautiful words. You can listen to those beautiful words again. You can read those beautiful words in the Bible. If you read about the story of Jesus in a children's Bible, you probably won't hear, you'll hear a summary of all four of those books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You'll hear a summary of all four of those books. In a children's Bible, you won't hear what John just said. You'll have to probably find that in a real Bible, all right? There's lots of real Bibles. You can go to Bible Gateway to find a real Bible that you want to read online, okay? BibleGateway.com. All right, so I think that's a beautiful beginning to know what light is, to know what darkness is, and to know what it means to be a child of God. Let's start reading the very first story in here that begins with Genesis. Genesis is the very first book in the Bible, the very first book, right? So just like this has stories in it, but each one of these stories is its own book. They weren't all put together in this book. They started out in their own book, like these. Like these books here that I have. All of these books. So let's say that I took all of these books and I wanted to put them in one book so that you had all these books in order but they were in one book, right? I could put them all together and I would have one book with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stories in it, right? I would have one book with 7 stories in it. But if I had one book with 7 stories in it, I wouldn't want to have each one of these hard binders, right? I wouldn't want to have them. What would I do? I would have one in the beginning and one in the end, right? And I would tell those stories and have somebody put the pictures that I liked in it, right? And then I would have one binder in the beginning and one at the end, right? And hold all those stories together and have them all in one book, right? That's what the Bible is. But we call each one of those stories here, we don't call them stories, we call them books. They started out as books. So we call them here, each one of the stories here, we call them books. Okay? All right. So, the very first book in the Bible is called Genesis. And Genesis means beginning. Genesis means beginning. So, the very first book in the Bible are stories of Genesis. And we're going to have, there's many stories here in Genesis. Many stories. Look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stories that are from the very first book in the Bible, Genesis. Genesis means beginning. So we'll probably hear about what? The beginning. The beginning of what? The beginning of what? We're going to hear the story that starts. It's called, oh, I love this. There was an evening and there was a morning. There was an evening and there was a morning. Oh my gosh, let's read. But first of all, let's talk a little bit about this too. Look at this book, Bible Stories for Children. This was broken up into many different, we could see many different stories here, but 2 great big books. They're called testaments. A testament is, if I have a testament, what a testament means is that I am truth. That's a testament. A testament is I am telling you something that I believe to be true. And we have an Old Testament. We have an Old Testament. And we have a New Testament here, right? So you could see an old truth that you could test and a new truth that you could test. Lots more stories in the New Testament you could see here. These are all stories about Jesus is what they are. They're all stories about Jesus. Okay, all right. So let me show you one more thing. This book I bought a long time ago. And so we want to look at when it was written and published. So we have a copyright date of when the first words of the story were written. And then we have a date here of when this book was actually published. But that's not what I care about. What I care about is what you might be reading right there that I have written there in cursive, or that is written there in cursive. And it's a letter to my son from Santa Claus. So that's how old this book is. Pretty old. I got this a long time ago. This is for my older son. Well, I didn't get it. He got it, and he got it from Santa Claus, right? Ask your parents about Santa Claus. We'll see. Yeah. So I'm going to read right here the note that I was just thinking about my son during that time. So I'm going to read the note that Santa Claus wrote. Dear to my son. His name is, well, I want to keep him private. So I'm not going to tell you his name because his name is very unique. And I want to keep him private. I'm going to give you some, I am giving you this special book because you have read your other Bible story books so many times. I am very proud of all you learned from those stories. I am especially proud of what a good boy you are for your mom and dad. I hope you enjoy these new stories and always remember the real reason we celebrate Christmas. Keep up the good work. Love, Santa Claus. So that's what Santa wrote a long, long time ago for my son in this Bible story book. So he must have been something like 5 because he was reading pretty early. My older son was reading pretty early. Okay, let's start with these stories. So let me see if I skipped over anything. So we saw the pictures of the stories that are in here. Yes, I want to read what this author wrote. And the author put these stories together, so wrote them in her own words. And I'm assuming it's a her. I'm not sure. It's Joni Eareckson Tada. Don't you love that name? Sometimes people wrote under different names just because they were writing something that people might not like. So they didn't always want to put their real name. Kind of sometimes like what I'm doing. Some people don't like what I'm doing. And so maybe I wouldn't want to use my real name, but I did. That's my real name. So Joni Eareckson Tada is her name. And I want to read what she wrote here. I love adventure stories, whether they're about a shepherd boy who becomes a king or a fisherman who drops everything to hunt for the meaning of life. That's why I love reading the Bible. In these Bible stories, you'll learn the names of the wisest man who ever lived and what happened to a man who landed in the belly of a fish. We already read that story, didn't we? We did. So we're going to read these stories, and some of them we're going to hear in different words now, right? So we know what happened to that guy. You'll go on a long hike with the people of Israel and see how God led them over dry deserts and through dangerous, deep rivers. We heard a little bit about the Israelites. You'll hear about a plague of frogs and flies and how a couple of fish and a few loaves of bread made lunch for thousands of hungry people. Oh, those sound interesting and new, don't they? So treasure the remarkable book you are about to explore. And when you read about the wise men, shepherds, and fishermen, when you meet Jesus, the Son of God, in the amazing stories of his life, ask God to teach you what he wants you to learn. It's that simple. Ask God to teach you what he wants you to learn. And who knows, you may discover that you are on a marvelous adventure and that your life too can be a story. Your life can be a story, an interesting story. I bet it already is. Some of your stories start with COVID. I know, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? It actually is. You might not like it. Hold on just a minute. You might not like that your story begins with COVID, or so far the most interesting part of your story is COVID. But you know what? Decades later, hundreds of years later, people are going to be talking about COVID. 100 years from now, people are going to be talking about COVID. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to sit next to your side and they're going to go, Grandma or Grandpa, tell me about COVID. You mean you got to stay home for 2 years or 1 year, whatever it was, and you hated it? I would love it. That's what your kids are going to say. That's what your kids are going to say about COVID. You mark my words. What you hated, everything about that you hated about COVID, they're going to think is interesting. So somebody from a kid's perspective, write a story about COVID. That's what you could do. Look at these stories are Bible stories for kids. They're for kids, right? You could write a story about COVID for kids. Get writing. Remember what I said? That one kid went all the way and learned all the way through to college during COVID time? He took all of his classes online, which you could do. Why not do something really cool? Why not do something really interesting? Once you get started, I know from the stories I've read that God will help keep you moving. And sometimes that's all it takes is a prayer. Ask God to teach you what he wants you to learn. And who knows, you may discover that you are on a marvelous adventure and that your life too can be a story. An adventure story that will lead you right into the circle of God's closest friends. Oh my gosh, wouldn't that be so exciting? I feel like I'm a very close friend to God. That's the reason why I read these stories to you. I read these stories because I feel like I'm a very close friend to God, and I want you to be a very close friend as well. And I want you to know how to do it. And some people think it's hard, and it's not. We already told you how to do it. Ask God. Just ask God. It already said, ask God to teach you what he wants you to know, to learn, to know about him, right? So that you can get to know him. Okay. Remember, this is story. This is story. Is called There Was an Evening and There Was a Morning. That accent, in case you didn't know, is an Italian accent, like an Italian, somebody cooking spaghetti there at the stove. But that sounded more like a guy than a woman. So there was like an Italian guy, because lots of times Italian guys did actually cook the meals because they were good cooks. So were the women, though. Yeah, they were for sure very good cooks. There was an evening and there was a morning. I'm supposed to be showing you the picture. Look, that is a magnificent picture. Look at that. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. The earth was empty and covered by night, and the Spirit of God floated over the waters. It's very interesting to me that there's a story in the Bible called Job. I couldn't find a children's story about Job, and that's because it's a very, very hard story to read. But this reminded me of the story of Job, because somebody else was floating over, looking to and fro for an honest man. But it wasn't God. It wasn't God. It was after God. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. The earth was empty and covered by night, and the Spirit of God floated over the waters. So it sounds like there's two things there. There's water and there's spirit. There's water and there's spirit. God said, "Let there be light," and the light burst forth. God saw that the light was good, and he called it day and separated it from night. There was an evening and there was a morning, and this was the first day. God said, "Let heaven separate the waters below from the waters above," and it was so. There was an evening and there was a morning. This was the second day. Then God said, "Let the waters below gather into one place, so that there might be both dry land and sea." And God saw it was good. God said, "Let plants grow and flower on the land. Let trees grow and give fruit." There was an evening and there was a morning. This was the third day. I just love it. Don't you love it? Dun, dun, dun. That's what it sounds like. There should be music here. I should have music. I should have had music for this. Oh my gosh. Somebody edit this and put music in. Editor, please put dramatic music in there after each day, please. Thank you. God said, let the sun light up the day. Let the moon and stars brighten the night. And God saw that it was good. There was an evening and there was a morning. This was the fourth day. God spoke again. Let birds fly in the sky. Let fish swim in the sea. And God saw that it was good. There was an evening and there was a morning. This was the fifth day. Look it. Look at that picture. Look at that picture of the dinosaurs. Look at how cute they are too. Didn't you always want to play with little dinosaurs? I did. They have those little oh, all of a sudden I can't remember the name, but they're like geckos, right? Geckos, right? Those little geckos. They made those geckos into a gecko ad, right? Geico, not gecko, whatever. I know. All of a sudden, hey, cha-ching, Geico, gecko. But didn't you always want to play with one? And you actually can now, kind of, right? Those geckos. You can. I don't know if they like it, though. I doubt they do. I bet they like roaming with their pals like this. I bet they like that best, right? Roaming with their little pals. Look at that. Amazing. Amazing. God said, let creatures great and small crawl and walk and run on the dry land. Then God said, I shall make men and women in my own likeness. They shall have children and have the earth for their home, all of the earth, which I shall give them. And God made people in his own image. God looked at all he had made and saw that it was good. There was another evening and another morning. This was the 6th day. On the 7th day, God rested. God blessed the 7th day and made it holy because the work of creation was finished. Really interesting, isn't it? Very interesting to me. So this is from a perspective which is called the Reader's Digest. The Reader's Digest. And I grew up on the Reader's Digest. It was it's interesting to me because it was the only book that we had in the house. And I find that interesting because I think that would probably make a pretty good study if the only book that you ever had in your house was Reader's Digest. So it was a good book. It went out of business not too long ago. It was a good book for stories, and it gave you lots of short stories that you could read about a lot of things. I love the illustrations here. I think they're really interesting. I don't find it interesting about the pictures of where's men and women, but when were they made? They were made on what day? Men and women were made on the 6th day. This is so interesting to me. I have learned a lot about the Bible, as I've said before, and yeah, I've learned a lot about the Bible. I've studied the Bible my whole life. It's not the main thing I've studied. It's been part of the things that I've studied, but I studied the Bible my whole life. And I know in the actual Bible that this story is told exactly like they have it presented here in the book. It's told in the Bible exactly like it's presented here in the book, where everything is made and then it goes back with men and women being made on the 6th day, God resting on the 7th day, and then it goes back to talk about making Adam and Eve. Very interesting. Okay, kiddies, we only have 3 more minutes, and as usual, I thought of more questions that we need to ask, that I need to ask. So I do have our questions up here. And in fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and we have 3 more minutes, so we're going to go ahead and look at the questions. But I also want to think about what was made on each one of those days. So when we come back here on Thursday, we're going to look at what was made on each one of those days. We're also going to review our sneeches, right? Our sneeches, because I have our sneeches on here, but probably not enough time to review it. So let's go ahead and I'll give you the questions that I have for this lesson. So I started reading from the Bible with a verse from John. Who was John? Who do you know John to be? So I read from this book here, right? I read from this book here. So I read from John. Who was John, right? What does it mean to keep your word? Who was the word in the Bible? Now, we didn't talk about this. I put this question up here because I wanted to talk about it, but we haven't talked about it. So, let's go ahead. We're going to talk about that when we come back, right? Okay. What do you think it means when someone is a light? Why do you think Jesus was called the true light? Now, these are things, again, I didn't talk to you about because I didn't go into the details about John, but I did want to make sure that I did talk about those things. We talked about there being a true light in here. That's what John said, true light. And the true light, spoiler alert, not spoiler alert. I asked you the question, you don't know the answer, so it's not even a spoiler alert. The true light is Jesus. That's who the true light is. Okay, all right. We're going to talk about these answers on Thursday. I wanted to make sure again that I gave you these questions so that you knew, or that so I talked about it with you. The Bible starts with the words, in the beginning. What does it mean, in the beginning? Now notice there too, I have those funny little marks there on the sides of in the beginning. We're going to talk about that in phonics too. So there's those funny little marks there at the first in the beginning, right? Those funny little marks. And sometimes we do this when we're talking. We do that. Those are quotation marks. And when we do this, when we're talking, oh, you participated, right? Those are quotation marks to emphasize something that we're saying, right? Or sometimes when somebody else said it before, we put it in quotation marks, right? When somebody else said it before, we put it in quotation marks. These are quotation marks because they look like the marks on the beginning and the end of the words in the beginning. In the beginning, there's these marks. At the end of that, there's these marks, right? Okay. Those are called quotation marks. All right. And what happened in the beginning? So we're going to talk about that exactly. What happened in the beginning on each one of those days? Who is God? What did he make? Who is God and what did he make? What did God do after he made everything? What did God do after he made everything? Do you think God needs to rest after a busy day? Do you think God needs to rest after a busy day? The Bible says that God made everything in 7 days. Do you think that is possible for God to make everything in 7 days? Do you think it is important how long it took God to make the world? Do you think it is important how long it took God to make the world? Okay, and then these are the review questions for Sneetches, and we have to talk about the answers. So I'm going to come back to all of this when we get back here on Thursday. So don't forget that tomorrow is our phonics lesson. So if you want to learn about phonics, and eventually we'll be talking about quotation marks and other things like that. So keep coming back for our phonics lesson no matter how old you are. I found out that some people are learning phonics who are adults because they didn't learn it in school. And that shouldn't be embarrassing for the adult. That should be embarrassing for the school. That should be embarrassing for all of us that we said that somebody is schooled and we didn't even bother to school them, right? And it's not schooled in that way like schooled. It's schooled in that way like you're supposed to learn something. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. You can call me Dr. Annette if you want to. I am in the classroom. More specifically, this is the early bird classroom. Thank you for joining me. For all those who did join me, I will see you tomorrow for our phonics lesson. I am Dr. Annette, and I am the teacher. Thank you.